Hey folks, it's Rob here with another Ask Rob Anything, and this is where a member of our community who is an annual member gets to ask me anything they like and they try to stump the guru. And today we've got Ashok, and he has got a pretty tricky one for me, very much outside of my sphere of, I guess, experience, but I'm going to do my very best to try and help out. Ashok, welcome aboard, mate.
Thank you, Rob. Really appreciate this one.
That's okay, mate. How long have you been part of our community?
It's almost a year now.
Very good.
Yeah.
And getting plenty out of it, I hope.
Yeah, indeed, I am. A lot to learn.
Very good. Well, okay.
Seasons.
So you've got a tricky site and a tricky problem for me. So tell me all about what it is that you're looking to purchase and what is the challenge that you want me to solve.
Right. Recently, I was run through a deal which already has a DA approval, but has a condition of seniors living over 55s. I would like to know how different it is compared to a regular property development and what precautions or measures I should consider to yield maximum profits on this deal.
Very good, mate. Very good. So firstly, my understanding is this is in New South Wales. So I'm going to broaden the question out so that everyone all the way around Australia can get lots of information out of this. And then I'm going to try and drill in for you. Okay. So there's a concept of seniors living over 55s. We've got a retirement care, I guess lots of different terminology that basically are trying to set up I guess a variation in housing stock so that as we start to age, we've got a lot of stock that is suitable for us as we grow older and we become a little bit less abled as we go. So generally the housing supply is created in such a way that it's a little bit more wheelchair friendly, it's a little bit more robust in how it's actually put together, because if we're walking around the property either with crutches or a Zimmer frame or a wheelchair, we're going to knock things and that sort of thing. We need a little bit more room. Okay, so now a typical house just doesn't have that. So as a general rule, most states around the country have some sort of incentives to try and create this additional stock that is going to be built slightly differently to your everyday standard house. Okay, so there might be some reinforcement, for example, in the bathroom. So you've got a handle, so when you try to get out of the shower, you don't slip over, those sorts of things, plus wider doorways and a couple of other elements like that. So in order to do that, to incentivize that, then what the government tends to do is they tend to have some policies that sit around what the approval conditions are as to how you can actually do this. And generally, they will allow the approval to have a little bit more density to encourage, I guess, developers to spend the extra cash in building the more expensive home. Okay, so you might get out of a site, you might get an extra 1, 2, 5 extra dwellings out of it, depending upon the size of the project, than you would if you did a more traditional supply. Okay, so that's the first part. So in New South Wales, the code under which that was done, I believe is called, and I'm going to look this up, so my humble apologies, it's called the State Environment Planning Policy, so SEP, Seniors Living, which came out in 2004 under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Okay, so you need to be very familiar with that SEP, okay, the Seniors Living SEP, to understand what that approval conditions actually sit in around, and the development approval conditions that actually came with that DA, because they will not be your standard everyday approval conditions. Okay, so there will be legislation that sits in there that dictates the kinds of people that, you know, so you can't just have an under 21 person living in an over 55 village. So there's going to be some constraints as to who you can actually sell this to and or lease it to. Okay, now a lot of developers use, I guess, this particular style of development for, I guess, an ongoing kind of rent in place type policy where you own the underlying land. You might sell the dwelling that sits on the land, or you might leasehold the dwelling that sits on it, but you own the land underneath it. So the developer owns the land forever, and they're going to get a residual rent for that, even though they've sold the property on to the next person. And then there'll be some rules in place that says, well, I'm going to buy that back, I guess, in 5, 10, 20 years time when you either move out or pass away or whatever that is. So there's a guaranteed buyback out of that process. Now, what that might mean, for example, let's just say you're selling the dwelling for 500K today. In 10 years time, you're going to guarantee to buy that back, typically at the same price that they sold it for. Okay, and there are going to be some make good conditions where it has to be brought back to, I guess, a normal, I guess, habitable standard, new painting, take the dents out of the walls, those sorts of things. But effectively what it means is that developer has been able to receive that cash today, plus being able to get some rent for the land underneath it. Generally, it's a fairly low rent, but it's still a rent nonetheless. That money can then be repurposed by the developer for however many years it is. And then at the end, it gets given back to, I guess, the estate for the person. So it effectively becomes a 10-year interest-free loan. So it's a pretty cool gig if you can get it. But because of that, there's going to be some ongoing maintenance that you're going to have to look after the property. So you're going to have to make sure that there's always a gardener that's actually looking after it. If there's any pools in there, that you're always got a pool guy that comes by, lots of things like that to make sure that you're keeping the amenity of the property in place to an appropriate standard. There's also going to be a whole bunch of rules that sit around, I guess, the people that live there, that they have to live harmoniously with everyone around them. So, there'll be house rules per se as to how they can behave to make sure that everyone is operating appropriately within the community. So it is not your typical everyday development. Now, in some states, depending upon the level of care that you're providing, are you just selling the property and standing back, or are you providing a level of care? You may actually need to have a license in order to operate this. Now, without having looked at your development approval and not knowing exactly what it is that you've been approved for, very carefully read the development approval conditions and that SEP policy, and also the legislation that sits in and around that from the New South Wales government around, I guess, the seniors living side of things. So I guess there's rights and obligations that the members of the community actually have within the facility, and there's also, I guess, your obligations as the operator and what you need to provide. So there's some legislation, the Retirement Villages Act, and also I believe that there's another one which is Retirement Villages Regulation. So there's the Act and then there's the regulation. So the Act is the policy and the regulation's how it's enforced. So make sure you read all of those. Now, they're not light reading. They will send you to sleep. But if you're looking to go into this, it is not something that you take on of the faint of heart. So don't do this and have no due diligence in place. You want to make sure that you put a lot of effort into this. It's a very specialist product. If you get it right, it can be quite lucrative. Make sure you get your demographic right. Understand that the people in the area that you're wanting to sell this to or lease it to, depending upon how you're wanting to do this, make sure that there's plenty of them that will actually take up the stock, because if there's not, if the demographic of the area is for young preschoolers, for example, you might struggle to actually offload this stock. But I'm going to hypothesize that the developer who did the DA did their homework, understood their demographic before actually going and choosing this one. But mate, it is not for the faint of hearted. So kudos to you for actually inquiring about it. But please be very, very careful in pulling the trigger and going unconditional till you know all those obligations.
Sure. Thank you, Rob.
That's okay, mate. So didn't solve all your problems, but give you some insight, I hope, into some of the things to actually go looking for. So again, Retirement Villages Act and the Retirement Villages Regulation are probably the two that you want to be predominantly to. You also want to make sure you read your development approval conditions and the SEP, the Seniors Living SEP, to make sure you actually get that right.
Sure.
Anyway, hope that helps. And if you out there in PDN land want to ask Rob anything, then all you have to do is be an annual member. Click on the links below if you are not already an annual member. What that allows you to do is come to any of our meetups all the way around the country, whether they be physical in person or whether or not you live stream them. We now run them in 4 different states. So Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. So no matter where you are, there is a PDN event on somewhere near you. Till then, folks, I'm going to say it's bye from me and it's bye from Ashok. So thank you, mate.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Rob. Cheers.
See you all. Bye for now.